Hi, welcome to Mr. Dyer's Musings. I'm Mr. Dyer, and today we're going to be talking about the Squirrel Hunters of Ohio. This is a Civil War-based video, something I've been excited about doing, and it falls in line with the past several videos of mine that's talking about squirrels and eating squirrels out in the field, foraging for squirrels, how to prepare them, etc. So we're going to end that series with this, and I got a special guest with me today. He's a longtime friend, been reenacting longer than I have. When I first started in the hobby at 14 years old, I remember seeing him at an event down in West Virginia, and we've stayed connected all this time. And as you can tell, I'm no longer 14. So I'm really excited about him joining me today. And I posted a video about where I want my channel to go. And this is one of the things that I wanted to include was interviews with various people and try to expand it beyond just me doing the talking and the educating and trying to include others in this educational journey that we're on together. But before I get there, as always, I want to thank my wife and family for their unconditional support. I want to thank my students for pushing me to be better. In that same sense, I want to thank you guys for watching these videos and pushing me to try to be better. If you've liked my videos in the past, if you subscribed to my channel, you just being here right now, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, check out my other videos on my page. A ton of them, most of them at this point, relate to the American Civil War, but I've also branched out and done early 20th century Boy Scouting, talking about artifacts and things like that. So we're mixing it up a little bit here and there. But now I want to introduce my good long-term friend, Justin Mays. Now, Justin Mays has a Kanawha Division Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, please check that out. He's posts regularly. There's always new information every week. He's very active with it. So check that out. He's also the Civil War historian at the Veterans Memorial Museum in Germantown, Ohio. And it's a really cool museum because not everything is necessarily behind glass. Now, of course, you're not encouraged to touch everything, but you can get pretty up close and personal with a lot of their artifacts, which is really cool, especially if you're like me and that material culture really helps you make that connection to history. So Justin has a lot of events that he puts on down there, and it's not just American Civil War. He covers information from the Revolutionary War up to our contemporary period, all giving respect and honor to those men and women who have served and helped our country be what it is today. So it's in Germantown, Ohio. I hope if you can, you go check it out.
Squirrel Hunters is, I don't think it's very well known. And years ago, I had the opportunity to talk to you about it a little bit, and it's something that's really unique. So can you go ahead and start us out by telling us how was it organized, when was it organized, and who was involved?
All right. The Squirrel Hunters came around in the late fall of '62 in September, and this was during the Kentucky invasion when Bragg was coming through Kentucky and heading, and they believed that they were going to be Cincinnati, Ohio was going to be attacked and be invaded by themselves. Well, they knew there wasn't enough men in the area to protect the town itself. So
okay. Go ahead.
So in 1862, after the Battle of Shiloh early in the spring, and then later in the year, in September and October, Bragg was doing his famous invasion of Kentucky. So the word got back to Cincinnati, Ohio area, and they were scared pretty much, same as Louisville and other areas on the Ohio River, that they might be invaded by the Confederate Army. So the governor of Ohio, he called up volunteers to come up and pretty much protect the border of Ohio. And this would have been older men, younger men who were unable to join the military, and they would come from every county in the state of Ohio. Now, they didn't do exactly, a lot of people think they just stayed on the Ohio River. They guarded river bridges, they guarded the Ohio River, they did a lot of things in town. There was a small garrisons that were going through Cincinnati at the time, especially, but there wasn't enough to fight off because they thought the Confederate Army was coming up there. They didn't know exactly where the Confederate Army was at. So when the call came out, the newspaper reported out of Cincinnati that these men were like backwoods men from the Revolutionary War. These guys were carrying squirrel rifles, shotguns, long hair, big beards, and a lot of these people never even seen people like this, because when you lived in Cincinnati, you were used to the kind of the high society of how the town was. But you got to think, 30, 40 miles either way, north, south, east, or west, there were still people who were living like they did in the early 1800s, who didn't have the modern, what they considered modern back then, of living. So the call came out. The deal was, they could not give them guns, so they had to bring their own weapons. They can give them powder, and they gave them a cup, a tin cup. That was kind of like a thank you for doing what you're doing. And this was your home guard. This was to protect the town. And they were getting paid just as much as the soldiers who were in the regular military. One of the funniest thing I find out about the squirrel hunters was the governor signed into legislative that the state would pick up the tab for food and lodging for these men.
That's a pretty sweet deal.
Okay, so that sounds great, but a lot of these guys have never stayed in hotels, and they've never had fine dining. And literally, Cincinnati was kind of in a ruckus. They said there was fights where guys were getting drunk, and they were staying in fancy motels and throwing things out the window, and they had a lot of problems. They didn't really know what to do, and trying to keep a law and order intact. General Lew Wallace, who winds up being kind of much the head of what we call the squirrel hunters, what army was in Cincinnati at the time, he will take control, and he actually gets a pretty good hand on it. Now, there were still some problems with it. Like I said, there was some fighting, drinking, other things that a man would probably want to do when he's in a big city, when he's got money to burn. And everybody was giving them things because they were there to save the town.
Right.
So they're, finally they came together. The ones who were in Cincinnati, they came together. They actually walked across the Ohio River on pontoon boats that were made up of coal barges from Cincinnati over to Newport, which is right across the river there. And they would go to the forts that were surrounded, that were being built, that were surrounded in northern Kentucky: Fort Thomas, Fort Wright, and there was about 6 to 7 other forts that were being built by free slaves and other laborers. And these would be garrisoned and be pretty much protected to watch the city. And it's hard when you go there now. Fort Wright is probably the best you could go to look at the area, but they do have an opening clearing, and you can actually see one of the other forts in the eye distance. So if one was getting attacked, the other one was getting attacked. But the squirrel hunters, this is where they would go. They would stay there. They didn't do drill. They didn't do anything like the regular military. it was kind of hard to get them to really do anything because a lot of guys were like, well, I'm getting paid to do this, so I'll do whatever I want. Guys were coming in and out all the time. But it was a patriotic thing a lot of these guys did. And after their term, I mean, they were only there for a couple of weeks, up to a month. And after it was all over with, they told them thanks and told you to go back home. Now, some of the younger boys, I have read that kind of lied about their age and wound up joining the Federal Army with other Ohio regiments that were in Cincinnati. And there's a couple of pictures out there that I have seen where shows him and what we as historians have tried to find what they look like. And this is probably about the closest we've ever seen. They didn't have military uniforms. It was all civilian civilian attire. They were wearing, some of them were wearing buckskin pants, long overshirts, dress coats, top hats. So there was all kinds of different kind of clothes these men were wearing, and it was kind of nothing was standardized for them and stuff. So it was a whole new thing to see when all these men were there in their different outfits, and you didn't know who was who really.
Right. The only standard thing that was given to him was a cup.
Yeah, that was it. It was a cup, and we have reenacted the squirrel hunters. And if you ever notice, we always have our cup attached to us some way on our bed, bed rolls, or hanging from a haversack or something like that, or hanging from a string. And that was kind of their thing, was their cup. That was what the U.S. government and the state of Ohio gave them, besides their besides giving them their money. And they eventually did get a discharge paper for everyone who served, and it actually had a guy in the corner picture, and he's got a civilian type knapsack, backpack type, and he's got a squirrel rifle, and that was what they gave to all the men who wound up joining the squirrel hunters, and that was it. Now, after the month was over with, some men didn't want to leave the nice town of Cincinnati and the pain of restaurants and the motel. And so, or the hotel. So they kind of had to kick them out because some guys were kind of abusing the purpose of it. And eventually the provost marshal and the city government said, you guys are free. You don't need to be here. Go back home. And they kind of kicked them out of the town.
Based off of your research, was it each individual person's responsibility to provide their own ammunition then, since there's probably a wide variety of arms?
The gunpowder, the way I understood it, the gunpowder would be provided. You had to find the way for your shot, whatever the caliber was. If you're using squirrel rifles, they would be a smaller caliber. Shotguns can been what would have been like 10 gauges and things like that. So it would all been different calibers. And so there was guys, they would melting lead and things like that, or buying that was a pre-made loads already. So, but yeah, I mean, I've never found a report that none of them ever fired their gun against anybody. I'm pretty sure someone probably fired it in drunkenness and being rowdy, and there was discharges of weapons all the time going on. Even if you look at other times through the war, guns going off, and but there was no confirmed deaths. Some wounded, I know. Some were shot. So the gun had to go off. I've seen that before, but I've never seen where any of them really died through the time they were the squirrel hunters.
Based off of your research on the group, did they go outside of the forts and do any type of patrols or anything like that, and then run into any bushwhackers or?
There was a small group of them that I read, and I can't say 100% if this is a true story. This is one of these stories you hear about. It could have happened.
Okay.
There was some movement of cavalry that was around the Burlington area, Confederate cavalry, and that's about as far as Kirby Smith's cavalry got. They seen the cloud dust, and they said they seen it. They fired some of them. They don't know if it was the squirrel hunters or what infantry or cavalry was in the area, fired guns, and they don't know who really fired, but no one knows if they actually ever really did fire their weapons at all.
Okay.
It was all mostly just reported, especially in the newspapers. They were trying to make them like they were big and bad, and they were just ready to go and fight, to the end. But that was just all stretched. The truth. A lot of times they were just stuck there in the city or at the forts and didn't really do much.
Okay. Do you know at the forts if they were supported by regular Army artillery or regular Army? Okay.
Yes, all the forts that were in the area were in Southgate, Fort Thomas, Fort Wright, Fort Mitchell. All had artillery pieces. They had 3 to 4 cannons, and they had a small garrison of infantry and some cavalry attached with them too in the area. I know there was and if you've ever been to the area, I've been there many times. I mean, you're not that far really from Newport and Covington. I mean, it would take you maybe a day to walk to some of the areas, but you could do it. And so it was all close to each other. You could see what was going on. And Lew Wallace, who, he did the best he could with civilians. That was pretty much what he had. He had a very small garrison, but with civilian men, free black men who wind up building a lot of the fort and laborers, he made it work. And that was the protection of Cincinnati. And that's everybody kind of forgets about it. They always think of the protection of Washington, D.C., but Cincinnati was being protected too by all the forts that were surrounding Cincinnati from northern Kentucky.
Man, that's cool. That's cool. All right. So 1862 is when they were pretty much organized. How long did they serve before they were completely disbanded again?
It was about reports were about 3 weeks up to 2 months. So there was always I found different records that since they were a little bit shorter in time. Someone said they were there for a couple months. And I know every discharge paper I've seen, and I've seen 3 or 4, they all have different dates. So, and of course, as a historian, you look at paperwork, especially military paperwork, there's like usually 5 or 6 dates and days, always mixing it up, and you never know which day is the one. It's whenever they signed off on it.
For sure. Do you know of any of the squirrel hunters that went on to join any regiments?
I know a few did. There was one young gentleman. He was age 16 during his time as a squirrel hunter, and he happened just to turn 17, and he wound up joining an Ohio regiment. I don't remember what regiment it was, but he wound up leaving, and he wound up going to fight in Tennessee and Georgia as part of the Atlanta campaign.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, he left home. The story was that he left home. That his parents really didn't know he left, and he went there as a squirrel hunting with his hunting rifle, and never came back home until the end of the war, and came back after 1865 when he was discharged. And pretty sure his parents probably wonder where he went, probably. So,
oh, for sure. Are there any artifacts that you know of that has been collected that if people want to do some further research, they could contact, whether it be a library or museum or something else?
There's a book at the Ohio History Connect called Squirrel Hunters that was written right after the Civil War in the 1880s. talks about it. I know some of the counties actually have some of the records of the of men from those counties who were squirrel hunters. I've seen Civil War memorials, monuments, like in what was that, Lorain County, and it was a township up in northern Ohio I was at, and they actually had the name of some of them that were in there. The problem is they were kind of overlooked and not written down because they were more of a militia unit, home guard, and there wasn't a lot talked about it. Probably in the last 10 years, there's been more studies on it. There's some guys out in eastern Ohio that has a few of the supposedly original hunting rifles that some guys used. I've seen one picture of that younger boy who was supposed to be in the squirrel hunters. Discharge papers that I talked about, I've seen a few of those over the time, but there's not a lot of info and a lot of things you can find out. It's just one of the things that you luck out, and then when you find it, you kind of run with it. And each, like I said, each county gave men to what they consider the squirrel hunters. So they were all over the state of Ohio.
That's fascinating, man. Like, just knowing that something like this, an organization like this existed, is pretty interesting for Ohio, I think. I mean, you hear, especially out west in the Western theater, this seems to be more commonplace. But Ohio, when I visualize Ohio in the 1860s, it's like you said earlier, for the most part, it's pretty well established. It's not like a pioneer state anymore. And just the fact that they had to call on civilians to come out and guard the border like that instead of just using regular militia or the regular troops, where especially early in the war, a lot of Ohio troops got sent east instead of focusing on the Western theater. It's just, it really surprised me when I heard this story. And I think it's really important, especially for Ohioans, to know about this aspect of it. Because, when people come to Ohio we have a lot of strong Ohio Civil War history. We have generals that became presidents. A lot of your regular generals came from Ohio that made it big during the war. But you always get the question, were there any battles in Ohio? And there's Buffington Island, but that's pretty much where everybody's interest kind of fades, unless you're talking about the prison up on the lake. So this is really cool. I really appreciate you coming on and doing this interview with me and telling us about this group. And, if anybody has any other questions, I'm sure that now that they know that you have that Kanawha Facebook page, they can go on there and pick your brain a little bit, or come see you at the Veterans Memorial Museum in Germantown. It's a fantastic museum. I haven't been there yet, but I've checked out the photos of it, and it seems like your guys' collection is extensive, and it covers every era of American history, right?
Yes. We have everything from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror.
So that's huge, man. And that's in Ohio. So it's another little treasure that we have here. And maybe in the future I can get with you after the whole COVID situation, and we can do a short video tour to whet the appetite of others who may want to come check it out.
Yeah, and
Justin?
Whenever this COVID hopefully gets over, whenever it does, we do have a reenacting group that does squirrel hunters impressions. We've been trying to do one a year, and the last time we did a really big one was in Sharon Woods in Sharonville, Ohio, and we had probably close to 15 or 16 of us there with flintlocks and old hunting rifles and shotguns, and it was great. And we've actually done living histories as the squirrel hunters at Fort Wright before too. So we do occasionally show up at events and do squirrel hunters, or we'll do living histories as squirrel hunters. So it's just something, like you said, you could do infantry or artillery or cavalry or whatever, but this is a different point of the American Civil War in the state of Ohio, and we want to tell their story too.
Just regular civilians, coming
Yep.
to the call and doing what they need to do to protect the cause. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
All right, Justin, thank you so much. My viewers, please check out Justin's Facebook page, the Kanawha Division. Please check out the museum in Germantown, Ohio. It's a real treasure. It's a great place for the family. And they have different events throughout the year where they set up living history displays, again, from all eras of American history, not just the American Civil War. So I strongly urge you to go check them out. As always, thank you so much for checking out my channel. Give a kiss and hug to your loved ones, and we'll catch you later. Take care.